Welcome back to the final part of the introduction of Frostfall. This time we are going to read through a diary, the diary of Mara. Mara had been the leader of the old Frostfall, and Mara had put together a couple of words that described his journey. He was, like the heroes today are, of the opinion that you need to save the city of Frostfall, and he was giving it all, his all. He was unfortunately not successful, but let's not spoiler, let's hear what he had to say. Apparently, he had found out that an army was invading, and he was trying to stop the invasion by all means. Day one, a start of a dark journey. After sitting in the city council for a long time yesterday, it was clear that we must act. My visions can no longer be ignored. The disappearance of people from the city must be directly related to the rising darkness. I assume that our vanished friends are already dead, and their remains of darkness serve as reinforcements for the army of undead. What a cruel way to find one's end, serving the undead army for eternity. Those of us who do not want to stand idle any longer have decided to act now and face the darkness. We hope that we can prevent the fate of Frostfall. Our current assumption is that our opponent will be a horde of undead, most likely to be led by some sort of vampires, which we must now put to an end. Unfortunately, the number of the remaining citizens in Frostfall has drastically declined due to weeks of starvation. Few of the citizens can still be in arms, let alone take such a trip through the wilderness. I have convinced my faithful bodyguards, Alami and Almasoon, to venture with me together. And I could also win the local priestess called Velias to join our ranks. She seems to make a heartfelt impression, and if I may add it as a side note, she's also a beauty to the eyes. We have discussed our first potential goal for the trip. After weighting up all of the possibilities, we will try to find an ally in the Fomorian. So we are moving west. It is unclear when the undeads will attack, but I fear that this day will come earlier than expected. Day 6. We are moving closer to the west. During our trip, I did a few further researches. I am annoyed today that I did not put more emphasis on mastering the arts of divination. In situations like this, knowledge is power. Should I once again enjoy the luxury of a real library, I will make up for this. I have received new information. Apparently, the Queen of the Fomorian died in an explosion many years ago. I already knew that, but what was new to me was the fact that all of this appeared in the city of to happen in the city of the dwarfs. I received clear indications for the joint extinction of the queen along with the city. But why was the queen visiting these people? And have the dwarfs been completely lost? I must investigate. The only thing that remains in certainty seems that the colony of the Fomorian and their entrance cannot be found. I wonder if there might be clues within the ruins of the Dwarven. Day 10. Mara's journey continues. Today, I met a few isolated snow orcs. I cannot hide my disgust for them. They might be individually innocent, but their species has done nothing positive. We have left their scouting party alive. In return, they have told us of their tribe and where to find them. On the topic of their origin, I still am not sure what to believe. Obviously, many of them seem to be non-native to these lands. If the scouting party has told us the truth, however, then they are descendants from a tribe out of the Underdark who moved here recently. Since I have not understood the orc calendar, my assessment of recently is not precise, but we might want to investigate that further. The meetings with the orcs in their camp later that evening had its positive sides. They were more talkative during the course of the day, and obviously we seem to have the same enemies. If I can believe the stories of these snow orcs, the darkness befalls Nym in regular intervals. They at least counted 2 so far, every 10 years from what they were mentioning. Most of the orcs seem to have a short lifespan, but they do have a leader, a half-dragon called Thrush, which reminds me of earlier times. They mentioned that we could assist them in a journey into the Underdark, but there are 2 problems with that. On the one hand, we have to travel deep into the Underdark, and on the other hand, identification of the possible traps and dangers seems to be difficult. Although the entire island is having a wide system of caves in the underground, a random search like they were suggesting would take weeks, maybe even months, which is way more time than we have available at the moment. Day 19, an engaging darkness. It seems to have been days since I've seen the light of the sun the last time. My eyes are getting used to the darkness, and my sleeping rhythm has adapted to the circumstances. I recognize the uncertainty in the eyes of my bodyguards. These almost unreal distant places slowly begin to consume their sanity. Yesterday, we finally managed to understand why we haven't been successful in finding the hidden crypt. Apparently, it's only visible during the brightest moonlight, so we would have to wait until then. Now that we have found the place, we are one step closer to our goal. I assume that we can finish everything today. Day 20. A statue. Time is pressing and my confidence is diminishing with every hour. The crypt was our best lead so far. But I seem to have been mistaken. That can't possibly be the lair of darkness that we have been looking for all the time. We found only 1 vampire spawn and some undead, nothing that we couldn't take care of, and certainly nothing that would have posed a threat to Frostfall. However, I doubt that only the cleansing here has had any impact on the army of darkness that is gathering. Instead of full-blown vampires, we found only skeletons and a few ghouls, nothing that we couldn't have dealt with. However, we've made an interesting observation. Inside of the crypt we found a spider statue of finest masonry art. In addition, we obtained an identical miniaturized edition, which apparently is linked to its larger counterpart and somehow represents the core pieces for a dark ritual. I will inform myself in the books which dangers the statue might possess. Day 22. A shimmer of hope in a dark time. I dare to hope again, because the analysis of the statue promises enormous potential. First of all, the frightening part. Apparently, there was already a city called Frostfall, here on Nym. This information simply changes everything. We'd always thought that we were amongst the first prisoners to be exiled here, but eventually there were things like that before. The fog around the island exists since 80 years. So I'm assuming that during that period, the process of exiling began. All the efforts to be the first one to survive in this wilderness seem to have a very different context nowadays. With the knowledge of the first encounter that I had here on Nym, which seemed to be random at that time, it's getting suspicious in hindsight. I remember it clearly as if would have been yesterday, when my guards and I were banished here, still indulging with the wrath of the wrong decision. We did not worry about our survival. We were raging and we were planning our revenge. But after the arrival, we instead met an old man who had an appearance like a hermit. How could he have survived alone in this hostile island? I remember how he told me about the layout of Nym and gave hints about surviving here. He must have implanted the idea of me building up the city, and he was the one successfully making me believe that we could change something. All these years I was never wondering about his rather sudden disappearance. I instead was convinced of the idea of Frostfall and pleased to be able to build something. In the light of the new knowledge, this old hermit might have had darker intentions. Did he collaborate with the vampires? And if so, for what reason would he first want to build a solid settlement just to run it over years later? Then wouldn't it have been easier to overpower each and every one of us upon our arrival? I do question the intention of the hermit and the fact that he concealed the existence of the previous settlement. He did not let me in the full story. Addendum: I spent the afternoon with an intense analysis of the statue. I'm sure it's not a trap. It's rather a connection to a shadow world. Maybe I can find out more about its connection to the former Frostfall. Day 25 of the journey. Every day obviously counts against us. I can't remember the last time I've been rushing and running constantly. Often, we use my spells to progress faster on this cursed island and push on above the human limits. I initially conjured up simple horses with first-degree spells, but soon we have to find out that this was no longer enough. The island just doesn't seem to end. Then I started to summon phantom horses, magical creatures from a dark dimension. In fact, they run much faster, and they walk on air with flight-like steps. They also seem not to be exhausted after long marches. Since we used it, our travel speed has risen up by 4 times. Despite our speed, we unfortunately had no success in extinguishing the undead permanently. We found another crypt along the wayside. We stumbled upon it. We had initially thought it was a resting place of evil bones, similar to the Moonlight Crypt. But our first impressions deceived us. Instead of freeing hordes of undead, we found ourselves in a rather drastic situation. For every skull we smashed, 2 more were created. Lastly, our forces, including my bodyguards, needed to retreat. And despite all the destruction we had done, I'm unsure whether this had significantly weakened the army of darkness. In hindsight, I consider these resting places to be pure illusions, appropriate to leech out and rob our minds. While I bring these thoughts to Papyrus, we are already on our way to the east. We have to go to Nevermore Castle. The less time we have left, the more desperate and the faster we have to move forward. Although I do not like the risks, I'm a realist enough to understand that our current situation is dire. Day 26, reinforcements obtained. Due to our faster travel speed, we have finally caught up with our reinforcements today. A few days ago, I called for help from a couple of fighters from the city. They were adventurers in their previous lives, who were jointly banished to Nim, and we found them very helpful in constructing the city. Together we will attack the Fortress of Darkness, the Castle Nevermore. I am concerned whether the missing information is correct, whether the missing information can be found there. I had tried to unravel the veil of uncertainty with an insight spell, one of my missing divination skills. I have modified the spell, but it wasn't able to pierce the environment. With more time, which we ironically do not have, I could succeed in maybe deciphering the powers of the spider statue, and maybe finally lift the veil around the castle of Nevermore. Oh, how I wish I would have learned more divination spells. With the combined forces, we should be able to spearhead into the castle. At the same time, I worry also about Frostfall, which we have left nearly undefended. Addendum: we've arrived at the Nevermore Forest today, a dark place with twisted landscapes, which look as if they were the result of a nightmare. I've ordered my men to increase their vigilance even further. Between the rotten trunks of the tree skeletons, shadows seem to be moving over and over. My eyes are not fast enough to follow them. I will memorize a few light spells for tomorrow, hoping to improve the situation. In addition, further voices appeared in the evening hours, first quietly, then louder. It's almost like as if they were calling us. Day 27. Terrible changes. The closer we seem to get towards the castle Nevermore, the more the environment turns against us. At night, no one of us could sleep. Memorization of magical spells is no longer feasible, and I need to make sure to not spread my resources too thin. I should somehow try to raise my concentration and perhaps move into a parallel dimension with a rope trick and find some resting place there for a night. Staying here means to expose ourselves to the worst conditions every day, and moving back would only mean that we have lost even more time. I am having nightmares every single time I rest my eyes. My mind begins to be filled with paranoia, and changes to my own body and the body of my companions are happening. I'm starting to see more shadows, although I know that they are just creations of my fantasy. At first I thought that my point of view was tarnished, but then I realized slowly that my mind is just playing games on me. As for my body, my toes have rolled up like snails into their shell, which crippled my movement. I can ill afford to memorize a flying spell, so I need to walk. I'm suffering intense pain whilst doing so. Luckily, we have taken sufficient supplies with us, because I doubt to find anything in this barren landscape. I had a deep form of anxiety this afternoon on a level which I've never felt before. Somehow, I know that I'm going to die soon. A thought that plagues me. I'm very sure I don't want to find my end in this place, and even worse, as a part of an undead army. The landscape around us changed. The trees themselves begin to bleed from time to time. The shadows are growing more intense. When I turn around, I sometimes see silhouettes of people attached to trees, hanging there, calling for help with silent cries. On top of that, I am regularly hearing cries of children from the underbrush. Whenever we look for them, nothing is to be found. An icy shiver keeps running down my back, and my body begins to tremble at this moment in time. From here on, the writing begins to turn into a more rushed version. So, day 29. So much happened. No time to write all of it down. The events are speeding up rapidly, as I don't know if I can write all of them down fast enough. Must concentrate. The escape from the castle is in full progress. We had found Nevermore, but unlike the hidden crypt, this was much more than we would have expected. The proportions of this building and the city around it are huge, and we did not have enough time to explore everything. The darkness became stronger with every minute that we were spending in this area, and my men were overcome with the urge to flee. My mind understands that this is only a side effect of the tainted environment, but my body behaves irrationally. I can physically feel the fear, the pain, and the madness which haunts this very place. My instincts were telling me to flee. This place has seen too much horror. The ghosts of the fallen are still haunting the castle. I should have learned more protective spells against the fear up front, because once you're caught in this area of restlessness, there is no way to memorize any further spells. My mind is feeling weak and exhausted now. Better preparation would have made this trip much easier. Maybe some sort of teleportation, or at least protection from the constant haunting, would have helped. The inability to regain any spells forced us into a position where we couldn't continue our journey here. So we decided to abort the exploration of Castle Nevermore. We haven't found the dark evil in these ruins. Some undeads, but certainly not the leaders behind the invasion. But we haven't had any time to explore the castle itself. I assume it must have at least 100 rooms, or maybe more. With our failure here, we left with one option only: to find the Cloudwalker Temple and beg for help from the angels to protect us. I was reading about lupinars, a dog-like species which is trained in their monastic way up here. Our main problem is to get there and climb the Cloudwalker mountain and defeat the clinging cold. As far as I'm concerned, no one has ever made it up here. Day 33, the cursed journey. Early morning. This travel and the bad luck just seems to not end at all. I should have listened to my mentor's diaries about the Cloudwalker's mountains. It is impossible to climb this terrain. For presumably hours, we were wandering around in ever-wide landscapes, not a single tree, not a stone, nothing that could help us to navigate. Even my experienced ranger with his keen eyes could not find the right path. Seemingly endless seas of snow and the always same white appearance. The mountains seem like a labyrinth which is slowly draining your life force. Unfortunately, this morning we have to find out that we were running around in circles. I've tried to use magic of the true north, but even this did not seem to work here. If the situation does not change soon, I see no way to get to the temple in time. We are almost faced with an immediate attack in Frostfall, and we need to get back there. I'm not even sure if anyone knows that the legendary Temple of the Walkers really exists. Maybe it's just a fairy tale. Later morning. Despite our preparations for this trip and our weatherproof dresses, as well as my magic of elemental protection, our fellowship was burned by the most severe frostbite I've ever seen. Today we lost our last klaxon. The innards were frozen faster than we could eat, and fire does not burn in this remote location. The whole area is unreal. I have not seen a living creature up here. The lack of air to breathe and the complete lack of food makes me feel like no one could survive these environmental hazards. Afternoon. Only the will drives us now. The beginning of the beings of the heavenly city could represent our salvation. In the books of the Bard which I'm carrying, I've read that the legend surrounding the Cloudwalker temples is another collision of planes. Apparently the guardians of this place are supposed to prevent any creature from entering through the rift. I wonder if the guardians of the city really exist, and if so, whom are they trying to protect? All I know about celestial beings is they believe in good. This should be reason enough to help us in such a dire situation. Day 34. Never have been so frozen. I am not exaggerating. I've never frozen that much in my entire life. I use the warmest clothes. We now wear all 3 layers of solid fur, and yet my skin is discolored in a bluish tone. During the last night I could not sleep despite my best efforts, hence I'm running out of spells. As a consequence, today I will have to use the last scroll of elemental resistance to be able to bring my companions through the day. Our weapons are frozen in the meantime and can no longer be used if we wouldn't want to risk the steel to burst right away. We left our firewood yesterday in the old camp. I tried to use magical flames, but none of the spells would work up here. Shortly after the ignition, the outside temperature seems to suffocate all fire. Day 35. It had come to an end. I am heartbroken and unable to write. My beloved Velias is frozen to death today. I could not moan for her loss as my tears froze immediately. I need to put an end to all of that. We will take the corpse back to the lower planes, and with our staff of life we will try to bring her back from the dead. Let's pray to Bokop that she accepts the revival. I officially declare our search for the temple in the clouds as failed. It remains unapproachable, and I should have listened to the warnings. Now, all that is left for us is to prepare ourselves for a final onslaught. I will die to protect what I've built up. My deepest regret is that I failed Frostfall, as I couldn't be the leader it deserved. And with that, the diary ends. Mara seems to have perished, and that is where the journey of our heroes will start.